Welcome to Keep Going, a podcast about failure and success, hosted by John Biggs. Every week, we talk to an amazing person about a time they failed and what they learned. And remember, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Welcome back to the Keep Going podcast. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show we have Eliot Pepper. He's been on the show, I feel like it's been a few times actually. Welcome, Eliot.
It's good to be back. It's always great to get a chance to talk.
So he's an author. I feel like I've been following your career and also finding your career fascinating and also being very jealous of your ability to produce endless amounts of science fiction that's actually selling to people, which is, I think, something that a lot of writers don't have that opportunity to do. So your latest book is Foundry, right? And why don't you tell us a little bit about that, and then we can go into the creative process for you.
Sure. Sounds good. Yeah. So, Foundry is a spy thriller. It's a spy thriller about semiconductor manufacturing. And the way that I got into that book is that, I just started getting curious. You know, I grew up, I was born in 1986. So I'm in that generation where like the internet, like I grew up with the first versions of the internet, and it's always been sort of endlessly fascinating to me. And, I would mod games when I was a kid, and I loved exploring the early internet. And something I realized recently is that I've spent so much time like looking at screens and thinking about computers as a window into the digital universe, basically as like just purely software. And I'd spent so little time actually understanding the atoms, like the hardware that's beneath those bits, right? And so I got really curious about like, okay, like what's actually inside my iPhone. The more I learned about how chips are made, all of the different components that you need to make computers work, and just like the astonishing levels of science engineering required to do this. I mean, like basically like semiconductor manufacturing is like significantly more advanced than like the Manhattan Project, right? Like it's crazy. It's like it is the frontier of sort of applied science and engineering, like in right now in the beginning of the 21st century. And so the more I learned, the more fascinated I was. And, of course, the more I learned, it's not just about like the technical achievements that are required to do this, but also about like all of the social and political sort of tie-ins that happen, right? Like this is a supply chain that is entirely global. It requires technologies from all over the world, and you have like TSMC, like the biggest chip manufacturer, the most important chip manufacturer in the world is in Taiwan. So you have all of these geopolitical issues riding on it, which like was actually an intentional bet by the Taiwanese government. They like developed that manufacturing capacity and like subsidized TSMC early on to try to become such a key part of the global supply chain that the US couldn't cede them to China, basically. So there were so many questions. And when I discover a topic where like every question leads to a new, meatier, weirder question, that's often when I think, ooh, this could be a good space to play with for a novel. Because in a certain sense, like for me, writing a novel is how I like think through questions that don't have easy answers. And like understanding the world of chips is sort of the infrastructure beneath our digital lives was just absolutely fascinating. And, there's so much real world espionage around the chip supply chain that it just seemed like both super obvious and also super fun to frame the story as a spy thriller. And so that's why I was so excited to write it. And, I'd say that like zooming out, one of the things that like I write near future science fiction. So like my books are not like they're not like space operas. They're not like Star Trek or Star Wars. They're like things that might happen in the near future that are really based in our world today, and like a what if question that like gives a different spin on it. And I feel like one of the internal bases for writing books like that, where I'm coming from, is that I really love learning about all of the worlds that constitute our world, right? You like learn about, like, I don't know. I remember during the pandemic, just like everyone else, I like learned to bake sourdough bread, and then like learned about all the microbiology behind it and like where to get your grain from. It's just like there are all of these worlds that are in our world.
But you didn't write a novel about it. You didn't write a novel.
I didn't, but actually, if you are curious, Robin Sloan wrote a wonderful novel called Sourdough that does this for like I highly recommend it. But I feel like there's a really cool thing about fiction where you can come to a book for the story, just be like, I've got a flight, I'm going to be bored, like I'm going to read a book on my flight. Like, so you're going there for the story, and yet the story sort of like opens this view into, one really cool rabbit hole that is like part of the planet we live on. And that's what I hope that Foundry does for readers, where if you just read it because it's a spy thriller and it's fun, that's awesome. And hopefully you will also come away like with just like sort of like a brief sense of the fundamentals of like this astonishing, wonderful thing that allows us to turn, you combine lightning and sand to make chips and like have the conversation we're currently having now.
So this is an interesting point. So I think when I talk to creatives, especially I talked to a novelist, two novelists actually, the past few weeks. They're very creative. They're creating entire worlds. How can you use the skills that you've gained from being a novelist in something like being an entrepreneur, or something like ideating on a vision? What are some of the things that you've learned as diving deep into these topics and how you organize your thoughts that could be helpful for folks who don't want to write the novel? They want to open a sourdough bakery or something like that.
Oh, great question. Yeah. So, it's sort of interesting. So I got into writing near future science fiction novels, while I was working at a venture capital firm. We were investing in early stage technology companies. So I had worked in a bunch of startups and then, invested in startups. And so I had this exposure to sort of thinking about the near future. And so in some ways, like writing novels set in the near future was not that different, right, than writing an investment thesis, or what an entrepreneur has to do is pitch the investment thesis, right? So the way that I would frame it is like, if you are starting a sourdough bakery, if you are starting your own business, or even if it's not your own business and you're starting a new initiative at work, right? Like you have a new project. Like the fact is that very, very, very few human endeavors are like you can achieve with one person, right? Like I write novels, like that's pretty much as solitary as you can get. And even so, like you can't, like a novel will not be commercially successful unless, in addition to the author writing the manuscript, you need the editors to help make that make the manuscript the best it can be. You need the cover designer, you need the people working on the interior design and typography. Then you need to figure out how to get readers on board. How do you bring this to people? Because the book can't succeed without readers. Just so, if you're starting a sourdough bakery, like you're going to need suppliers to like, where are you going to get your flour? Like you're going to need a landlord for wherever you get your commercial lease to set up the bakery. Like you're going to need to hire staff who want to get up at like 3 a.m. to come in and
make the dough.
Yeah. And are you going to supply restaurants, right? Like, or are you just going to sell directly to people? Like, you need to figure out like all of those people, including your customers, you need to be able to bring them together in service of this shared goal. And like, that's any new project requires that, unless it's literally something like a diary where you are doing something only for yourself. If you are doing a project that involves other people, you need to figure out how to get those other people on board, which means that a founder, like an entrepreneur, the person who is like the spark behind that project, like most of your day job is telling stories, right? Like you need to put the story of what you are seeking to achieve in the world out there and bring it to those people so they can get excited to try your bread, so that they can get excited to work at your bakery instead of that other bakery, so that they can get excited to partner with you and get you the best grain when you need it or whatever, right? And like the same is true if you're doing a technology startup. Like you need your early team members who can like help you make the thing. You need your investors who will pay for those team members to make the thing. You need the partner. You need your customers who actually want the thing. And so as a founder, like most of your day is talking to people and trying to like tell a story that invites them to participate in this project you are trying to realize in the world. And I think that the trick is many founders don't see themselves as storytellers. They might say, I'm an engineer, I'm making this product, like this piece of technology or this product, or I'm a baker, I'm going to like make the sourdough bakery. And they're not self-aware about the fact that like when they are trying to recruit their first assistant baker, they are storytelling, whether they're conscious of it or not. And so I'd say that the first step, if you're an entrepreneur or a founder, is to be self-aware about that, right? Like if you are telling stories all the time, figure out how to tell stories well, just in the same way that if you're going to bake sourdough bread, you better figure out how to bake it, right? Or if you're that engineer, you're going to have to figure out how to build the software architecture web. And so like realize that you're telling a story and start with that, right? And then start to think about, okay, how can I improve this story? How can I, when I'm interviewing the third person and I'm trying to get them on board, right? What's clicking? What's not? What can I do different next time? I actually find it very instructive as a novelist to look at other stories told in other formats, right? Because I'm so in the weeds with novels that sometimes it's like harder to parse other people's work. Whereas if I watch stand-up comics, I can learn so much about good storytelling because every joke is a story. And you have to have the setup, you have to have the, sort of complication, and then you have to have the punchline that pays it all off. Like that's narrative structure right there. So if you're pitching your sourdough bakery, go watch a Netflix comedy special and think about the fact that every joke is like a story. How can you explain what you're seeking to achieve with your bakery in that kind of a format where there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, where like you're building up to some kind of release of tension, right? You're building tension and then releasing it, where when someone reaches the end of the story, they're excited not to just have been entertained, but to get involved, even if that involvement means like coming out to your opening day and like trying a pastry.
What does that mean in real terms when it comes to pitching an idea? What do you think is necessary? Do you think that narrative platform is necessary for even like a 10 slide pitch?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like a 10 slide pitch is like a very structured story, honestly. And I think that, okay. So I mean, I feel like John, you could probably give way more advice on this than I could, but I mean, like my take is basically that like, the most common mistakes that like founders who are pitching for investment make are that they are so focused on building the thing that they talk about the thing, right? So they're like, oh, we made this awesome thing. Let me tell you more and more about the thing. And like the investor doesn't care. Like that's not what's important. Like if you were going to structure like this isn't just purely a fundraising pitch, but if you're trying to almost like structure like your manifesto, like your like core story, like the obvious way that like works as a template for many businesses and just like many projects is like, you said you had talked to a number of novelists and that novelists have to invent worlds. Well, the fact is that founders do too. Like you need to build an entire worldview that requires your company. And so like, this is your opportunity to express that. And so the way that you do it is first you say, look, like this is the world as it is, right? Like this is the story of the world as it is. And here is a really key problem in the world as it is. And like, this is how people currently deal with this problem, right? Like, whatever. I live in this suburb and there's no, like, I have to, if I ever want fresh bread, I have to like drive into the city, right? Yeah, I mean, like, this is like a silly example because you'd obviously never be pitching it like this.
Fitbit for dogs, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so and spend all, like, if you can only achieve one thing in your conversation with someone, get them to fully grok the problem, right? Like if they agree with you that there's a problem, if they agree with you that like, oh man, yeah, it would suck to live in that suburb and never get your cinnamon buns or whatever. If you can win them on that, everything else is easy. Because if they believe that this is like a real problem that people struggle with in your suburb, then the solution, which is what almost all entrepreneurs like spend all their time talking about, which is like, I'm going to open a bakery in this suburb, is obvious, right? Like if you pitch the problem and really invite people into the emotional truth of living that problem, then the rest is like a wash. Like basically, if you talk to people and you can convince them that that's real, then whatever solution you have, they'll be excited about because you're obviously the expert. You've already shown them why this problem matters right now. And so you need to transition from like spend most of your time and energy inviting them into the problem, then explain actually very briefly, like how, like the new way in which you are going to address it. I'm going to open a bakery in the suburb. And then like at the end, you just like when you watch any Hollywood movie and like they have the, like after the climax, after like you have the denouement where you're showing the new world, right? Like you're showing what it means for this character to have reunited with their father, right? They don't just say, I've been reunited with my father. They're like now on a fishing trip with their father or whatever. So you can see that this change has been made real in the world. Just so you want to end your pitch that way. This is what the world can look like with our solution baked in, right?
This is what the world looks like when we're done, right?
Yeah, that's what allows you to go back to that like cosmic level that you opened at, that this is a worldview. It's not just like a widget.
How do you maintain the energy to produce a long form creative work?
So, when I'm not writing, I'm surfing. That's like, yeah. So like I surf 4 or 5 days a week. And we live in Pacifica, which is like right south of San Francisco. So we're like in a little beach town. Like I can just like quickly to the beach. The thing about surfing is I've played a lot of sports in my lifetime and like, geez, nothing is as hard as learning to surf. Like not even close. Like skiing, rugby, I don't even care what you're talking about. Like surfing is so much harder to learn because imagine learning to ski. You get your rental gear, you go to the mountain, you get in a class, they're taking you up the bunny slope and you're just sort of like going over and over again and like practicing technique, right? Well, when you learn to surf, like the mountain is a moving piece of liquid in the ocean, right? Like even getting onto them, like catching a wave is extremely challenging. And you're not even surfing until after you've been able to catch enough waves that you've gotten the practice that you could get on the bunny slope, right? So the learning curves are just extraordinarily long. And what that means is if you want to progress as a surfer, like you're going to have a really tough time if you're basing it on achievement of explicit external goals, right? Like extrinsic goals where you're like, if you were like, I want to get barreled, right? Like as a surfer, like I want to be in the barrel of the wave. And like, that's your goal. Like, I mean, you're literally talking like years and years and years and years and years of like extremely consistent work to get to a point where that's going to happen for you. And so people who have those kinds of extrinsic goals just drop out, right? It's like, it's just not worth it. It's like, there's too much pain to put up with to like get to the extrinsic outcome that you've set for yourself. Imagine like Frodo in the Lord of the Rings, like, it's like, okay, Mordor, like he went through a lot to put that ring in the volcano, right? And like most people just aren't good, like just don't stick with it because it's just too far out there. And so for me, like as a surfer, I don't focus on extrinsic goals at all. What I'm trying to figure out, like the reason why I've kept surfing and why I've progressed over the years is precisely because I just enjoy practicing surfing. Like I like going out even when it's a crappy day and I'm not doing very well. Like I'm just like, this is what I'm here for. I'm just going to make a daily habit of this. This is the fun part. And I remember when I was a kid, my parents made me learn violin, and like I hated to practice, right? Like I just wouldn't practice. And so I'd like the teacher would come once a week, or I would go to the teacher once a week or whatever. And like I was terrible. It just never worked because I hated the practice. And so I found that for writing is just like surfing. Like if I was writing a novel just so that I could have written a novel, that would feel very much like trying to learn to surf just to get barreled. And I would I've now published 11 novels. I wouldn't have even written one, like, let alone more than one, and let alone like 11. I'm now working on my 10th novel, right? Like, and so instead, what I'm trying to do is think about where can I find the fun in the practice of writing novels? Where can I be like, okay, I'm working on this new scene today. Like I'm like in it, I'm like visualizing it. I try to like eliminate distraction and really be with the story. Like for me, like that practice has become really meditative. Like, because I have, like, it's hard, yes, but it also is really focusing and like clears your mind and like puts you in this special psychological place. And so for me, I keep writing novels, not to write more novels or or because it's like somehow like serves my career as an author or something like that. It's just that I'm like, okay, this is like sort of a daily practice where I like being in that emotional space of writing. And so I enjoy practicing it, and the results are actually just like incidental. In the same way that if I'm surfing and I enjoy just being out there and paddling and being in the ocean and like trying things and experimenting, if I get barreled, it's incidental. It's not like the reason I'm there.
Fascinating. All right. So I want people to go out and get all 11 of your books. I think that'll be very helpful to you.
That sounds great.
Yeah. You should do like a box set. We'll call it the Eliot Pepper experience. This has been super helpful. I think the way you explained the energy it takes to continue surfing and to continue creating I think that's vital for people to understand. So I really appreciate that.
Well, and I mean, I think about your podcast a lot. I mean, like just the fact that it's keep going, and I suspect that there's some similar dynamic at work for you. That the reason why listeners pay attention to this podcast is in part because you enjoy doing it, and like you've been doing it for long enough that people notice. And like I doubt that what's driving you is just like building the biggest audience possible. Like you are living the lesson that this podcast title is about in the way you're producing. So I think that's really cool, and I admire it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm like I say, I'm atoning for my sins, my being a jerk at TechCrunch, and now I'm just being like, everybody's got to do good, cool stuff. Eliot, thank you for joining us. This has been really amazing. I really appreciate it.
Likewise. Cheers.
This has been Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. We'll see you next week.
I was so lost, pacing back and forth for 27